following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
And it was just the perfect solution for that scenario. So after that, we scratched in the first version of our contracts. We decided to start over from a much more simpler contract, and then created a subgraph, and that's the current version of our protocol. Is using the graph for all the reading of the passport.
We're like astronauts, floating in the space of time. Trust and
Welcome to the GRTIQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Alejandro, co-founder of Krebit. Krebit makes Web3 identity more trustworthy and privacy-preserving by providing fully decentralized, community-verified credentials. If you're a longtime listener of the podcast, then you know I like to occasionally shine a light on the stories of entrepreneurs building in Web3 and using the graph as core infrastructure. Krebit is an up-and-coming Web3 solution addressing the challenge of Web3 reputation and identity, and is already forming important partnerships with projects you probably already know, like Orbis. During my interview with Alejandro, we talk about his home country of Colombia and the emerging crypto and technology scene there. We also talk about how he became interested and moved into Web3, what Krebit is and how it works, and then we talk about the graph and the future of Web3. As always, I start the conversation by asking Alejandro about his educational background.
I'm a developer. I've been a developer, for many years since I was a kid. I also had studies in electronics and telecommunications engineering. That's my background. And then I did a lot of self-learning in the open source movement and Linux and all that. And then after my first startup, I also did some courses on design thinking and design management.
What do you think drew your interest in engineering and software development? What is it that prompted you to pursue a career in these things?
So I'm a kid of the 80s and the 90s. All of the content that we saw in those days were mostly about building robots and computers, the first mobile phones and all of that. It was just impossible not to get interested into building stuff. And, that movie when the main character needs to hack into a computer and you need to reprogram the robot and launch the satellite. And that tends to turn you into an engineer.
So Alejandro, you're joining me from Medellin, Colombia. Colombia's gotten a lot of attention recently. Of course, ETH Bogota was recently hosted, a little bit of ways from Medellin, but certainly got a lot of attention for Colombia. What can you tell us about the crypto scene in Medellin?
Well, not just Medellin, but in Colombia, crypto has been seen since a few years back as a new way for people to get coverage or store value because of instability in inflation and economical ups and downs. So that was like the starting point. And then also Medellin has positioned itself as a city where there's a lot of developers and a lot of companies go looking for developers, and software companies are investing there. So also the government started pushing for events and sponsoring, training for people to get into developing in the Web3 space. So I think all of that has made it possible for now having this new interest in not only using crypto, but also starting building crypto.
Because of your age, you've had the opportunity to see this evolution firsthand. You've been able to watch a period of time where maybe the government or the people weren't as involved in technology, Web3, crypto, whatever it was, to present day where it sounds like it's getting a lot of momentum. My question is, what have you seen? Like, what are the observations that when a country or a group of people start to get more engaged in building and developing in technology?
So I think there was this idea that Colombians are very creative in general, like for arts and even for illegal activities. Colombians were seen as, oh, these people are very creative, even for illegal activities. And once, all this software and all these new options for people to use that creativity for building stuff and not having to leave the country and also not having to invest a lot other than having, computer and the internet, you can lower the cost to get some big earnings and be more successful in your life. So you start seeing that all that creativity got into the digital and programming space in Colombia, and you start seeing that pay off. So now, if you combine that with being on the same time zone for the US and US companies looking for talent that is on the same time zone that can speak English as a second language, even though it's not that common for people in Colombia to have very good English, but it's still better than some other countries like in the same region. So that gives an edge, and you can maybe say that that's why there's like a boom of developers and people working in digital jobs in Colombia the last years.
A lot of my listeners would have been to ETH Bogota and participated in that event. They probably didn't make their way to Medellin. How would you describe to listeners how Medellin is different than Bogota?
Yeah, no, it's a totally different city. So Bogota is like the capital and it's cold, and it's like 10 to 12 million people. So you get that. I think like if you are from the US, the comparison will be like Bogota will be to Medellin, the same way New York is to San Francisco, for example, or California. Like it's kind of a similar vibe. Like in Medellin is like an entrepreneurial, more chill kind of vibe. Like the weather is just perfect, quote, quote. So it's very different. Like the vibes are a bit different. So yeah, a lot of people get to Medellin and then they never left.
You mentioned this a little bit earlier in one of your responses, but I want to double click on the impact something like cryptocurrency would have on the people in a country like Colombia. When you think about the potential of crypto and how it could impact and change people's lives, what would be the impact for the people in Colombia?
So not in Colombia, but all Latin America right now, there's a lot of impact because of inflation. Like if you take two countries or three countries that are being more impacted are Argentina, Venezuela, and Colombia due to inflation. So it's going to be super important for people to get into crypto for storing value and not losing purchase value from their income. So that's one, storage of value. And also there's a big source of income from people in Colombia, which is payments or money that they get from people from other parts of the world, and that maybe Colombians are living there and they will send their family money, or they just work remotely. So all those payments are also a huge of the crypto space. And there's a little bit of investment and trading, and not so mainstream, but there is a lot of people interested in that. Also, for example, I've seen that with some of my friends. They will do trading and investment in crypto, but they will keep it for themselves. Like you don't speak a lot of that because then you become a target for maybe for security reasons. You don't want to disclose that. But a lot of people is definitely interested into that. And in this economy, people will find ways to try to get some extra income and get creative as well. And also, not to mention that this is a problem, I guess, in the whole world, and that's why they're regulating the industry. But also, there's a lot of illegal money going on, and that's like the trade-off. The builders that are trying to do this like the right way, but also there's people doing bad stuff. And that's like the regen balance that we're all in the whole world to do, right?
Because I have the opportunity to speak with people all over the world, there's certain type of questions I routinely ask in the podcast because people living in different parts of the world offer a unique perspective on these questions. And one question I ask frequently is about the utility of crypto and Web3. And the question is, do you think because people living in the United States, as an example, don't have necessarily the concerns about inflation that people in Latin America do, and maybe they have a stronger, more developed banking and financial system, do you think they are going to be slower to realize the real utility of what crypto and Web3 can do because of the fact that they have those types of benefits?
Maybe. I think in general, people want to have passive income, and there are some countries that have more financial education and financial systems that are more regulated in terms of interest rates. And so I think the US has had some lower interests for, getting some loan for buying a house, and maybe not the same as decades ago, but still it's a rate that is much lower than the ones that we have in Latin America and Colombia, where basically the banks are having these huge rates, and they basically run the country. So I think because of those conditions, people is more open, and people have rejected a lot of the finance system and banks, and people have used cash, mostly cash, in Latin America for a long time. They have rejected getting credit cards and a lot of payment forms that were available because of the high rates. And now with these new ways of these new finance tools and all these tools that are being used for DeFi, at some point they're going to be much more interesting for people, and they're going to see, oh, this is better than the banking system, which has been pushing us too far. And now we are ready to test this other stuff. So maybe in the US, the banks are less, have been pushing people less than in Latin America. I guess that will be my take.
So let's go back in time a little bit here. Do you recall when you first became aware of crypto and what your first impressions of it were?
I was there when Bitcoin first came out, and it was like a technical novelty. And at that time, it wasn't seem like a huge financial thing with a lot of value. So we just took it as, oh, okay, this is interesting. It's an interesting solution. Let's try it out. Let's do mining of some Bitcoins in my laptop. And then forgot about it like for years. And then suddenly, oh my God, this will explode. What happened? I may need to go try to find those Bitcoins that I mined in my laptop. I need to find that backup. And and that was it. And then it really got into the public's attention. And for a time, I honestly didn't pay a lot of attention to it until right before the pandemic, because it was really in the pandemic first, and I had time to actually go deep into how these things really worked and how to build and how to get into the details of the crypto space. And also because I really saw, okay, economy is going to crash. This may be the answer, survive to weather that storm. So let's get really into it. So that was like a big incentive to focus on that.
The GRTIQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTIQ, and thank you for listening. Listeners who enjoy this content can help support the GRTIQ podcast by leaving a review or a 5-star rating wherever they download podcasts, by sharing episodes on social media, or by simply telling a friend or colleague about something they heard or learned from one of our guests. It's support from listeners like you that make it possible for us to keep shining a light on the people and stories behind Web3 and the graph. So after you became interested in crypto and you realized that Bitcoin had some value there, what was the path you took to going to work full-time into Web3?
So at that time, it was still not clear what layer one was like the best platform to develop. So because of my experience of many years in engineering management position, like one of my main jobs usually is, okay, how to pick a platform we are going to develop, because we are going to develop on this over the next 5 years or so. So we really need to pick a platform and framework that we feel comfortable that we can build, and then we know we're going to stick with that with a few years. So I took my time to really see what frameworks were out there that we can build with. And I saw Ethereum. I thought Ethereum was a good framework. Even though there was a lot of competitors still coming in, I saw like the main criteria used is there was a lot of developer tools for building on Ethereum. And the tools is what might attract developers, because for a developer, like having to go through the deeper learning curve or building the tools in order for you to start developing. Whether if you already have the tools and everything is ready for you to develop, then it's much easier, right? So you're going to pick that. And also the amount of applications or potential applications that people were doing in Ethereum. So I decided to go deep in Ethereum. I started learning Solidity. I took it from there. That was my first approach. And then I started working on Krebit. Like my main motivation with Krebit was solving some of the problems I think are the biggest that we have in the internet, which is trusting people in the internet. Trusting people in the internet is hard when you don't know. There's a lot of fake accounts. You know how to trust, basically. And even after you take the time to build a reputation in what platform, and if there's a new platform and you want to start on that platform, you have to start reputation from scratch. And so I thought that problem was interesting enough to start working on and see how we could solve that using Web3, crypto, and smart contracts. And then I went down the rabbit hole of identity, reputation, credentials. You know, it's been almost 2 years since going down that rabbit hole. And the pivotal point when I really thought that I was working on something interesting was after I took all those ideas and I put them into this yellow paper on how to build a reputation protocol for Krebit. I published that and a MVP into the Gitcoin grant platform. And it was with the Gitcoin grants that I really saw, okay, people is interested into this topic. It's interesting. People is willing to put money into this. I mean, I got some interesting contributions there. And I said, okay, let's work more on this because this is needed and clearly people wants to support it.
Let's unpack that a little bit. We're talking today because of Krebit and what it promises to do in addressing this problem of reputation and identity in Web3. For listeners that haven't heard of Krebit before, you mentioned it a little bit there, but how would you describe exactly what Krebit is doing and how it works?
All right. So Krebit is what we call a reputation protocol, and it tackles the problem on how can you prove things about people that you don't know, and how can you know that these things are true, even if you don't want to know all the details of there, you don't want to share all the private information, right? And in order to do that, you have a basic problem that you need then some intermediary. Like throughout the millennia, we've been using some central authority to say, yes, this person is called like this. Yes, they are who they say they are. Yes, they went to this school. They completed this course or whatever. So you need some central authority or reputable authority that you trust or everybody trusts to say that you are who you say you are. So mapping that in internet and what you will call the network state. Some people is calling this the network state. We took some ideas of that. I think it was Balaji, this influencer Balaji, who started speaking about the pseudonymous economy. And before hearing that, I was thinking, okay, we want to be able to, earn income and prove things in the internet for anonymous people. And you may want to be anonymous because this idea of, Satoshi Nakamoto was anonymous and you don't know who they are. And this hacker group Anonymous. So it's appealing to be anonymous on the internet. But in reality, most of us also want to be, influencers and public persons and all that. And the current companies are abusing people willing to expose their data online. So the idea of having a pseudonymous economy is, okay, can we do something like in the middle when you're not absolutely anonymous and you're not completely public, but you disclose which part of your identity and your personality you want to share with different parties and different levels. And the way to do that is having an identity where you can prove things and you want to have those things encrypted and only share them with who you want to share them with. So what we do in Krebit is give you the chance to prove those things, have them proved in a private way, and collect them in what we call a reputation passport, which is basically just having your data in a decentralized network encrypted, and you can control who you want to share it with. And then make it very easy for apps and other people to check that those things are correct or verified and read them and write them easily. That is what Krebit does. And if you think about it, the applications for that, the use cases are a lot, right? So you can do so many things with credentials. So we decided to start with just like the basic use cases, which is proof of skills, basically proof of talent, proof that you have, certain things, or you have done work in some code repositories, or that you belong to some communities, or that you have certain amount of Twitter followers, things that are not so easy to get. I mean, it's not like this checkbox of I'm not a robot that is, very basic of, okay, this is a human. But, okay, this is an identity online that has an online presence, and you want to share what's your Twitter handle. You can share that you have 10K followers, even if you don't want to disclose which ones. So that way you can build this autonomous identity and you can use it to join communities. And you hope that it can also be used for under collateralized lending and other use cases. And also you can use it to be recognized and have reputation in a way that you own it instead of being part like just in the Krebit platform. We don't own it for you. You own it. We just give a way for you to build that reputation. So that is the general concept of Krebit. And in practice, what you can do right now in Krebit is you can go there, you can start building like your professional portfolio. Think of it as a LinkedIn, but backed with cryptography proofs of everything that you see typically on a LinkedIn profile. What have you worked? What are your skills? Who are you are connected to, etc.
How important is addressing these issues related to identity and reputation for the future of Web3?
So if you ask me, this is one of the core problems of the web in general, but also Web3. If you see the first thing that Elon Musk did when he came to Twitter is, okay, how do we solve the problem of people getting verified? Like, are these real people or not? And if you take that from Twitter to Web3, it's even a worse problem. Like, are these anon real accounts? Are these people, like, who are these people, right? So if we want to really escalate things like DAOs or things, governance, so at a large scale, we need to solve civil attacks, and we need to know that people is who they say they are. And we need to know more than how much money you have. Like, if you're a wealthy person, we need to know if you really have experience in your area. Like, how do I know that you are very good at media, publishing, marketing, or developer or design? I need to get some actual proof without having you to dox all of your private information and things that I don't really care if it's your private information, but at least I know that someone else or there has been some validation, but some trusted system that tells me that, okay, this person has actually done these kind of things before, and I can trust that, other than just you saying that. So if we can solve that in a consistent way, in a scalable way, I think we can truly escalate all the benefits that Web3 can have for society at large.
What can you tell us about the Krebit team and some of the present initiatives that you're working on?
So we are really a small team. One thing that we are doing right now is working closely with our partners and making sure that our tools and our SDK and our protocol is easy for other partners to integrate. And we just had, at the end of December, the first Web3 social hackathons. And we were working there with partners like Orbis, like Ceramic, like Elite Protocol, Hyper, and others that are building for Web3 social. And there were some interesting projects there. And we really want to be part of the ecosystem. And we want to provide this simple way for people to create these credentials and verify those credentials, and then give some examples of how these credentials can be used. One of the examples, and these little prototypes that we've been launching, the latest is a review system that is easy you can have this widget for reviews that we just launched and add it to your blog. And you can start collecting reviews from people that can do that with their own reputable profiles. So the reviews that you collect are from also reputable people. And that's how you start creating like this Web3 of trust, people that trust in another. So that reviews is something we are pushing for right now and working with our partners and builders to use our protocol.
You've described Krebit as a social credit system. This sort of implies that there's other types of credit systems. My question is, why is a social credit system better than other kinds?
Yes, so this concept of social credit systems, I think I took it from, there are actually some communities in the world that work like the same way that the society was working hundreds of years ago, that I will do a favor for you, and then you owe me a favor, and then when I need to do something in my house, you can come and help me do that. And that kind of system is what is called a social credit system. And in the present day, you see like this topic, social credit systems that some governments want to impose. Like, for example, China, like 5 years ago, they launched this social credit system where you have to behave in a certain way. And it's like if you break some rules in society, I don't know, you skip the queue for something, and then you start losing points, and then you cannot buy tickets in the first class for the train or something like that. So it's like a system of punishment and rewards, but that can get very dystopic if it's controlled by a government, right? So the idea of trying to create a system that is also based on rewarding and punishing reputation for pseudonymous identities using decentralized tools is that even if you use, let's say that you screw up, maybe you did something wrong, right? And then you have to start over. But maybe you don't have to start over, and you can take some of the good things that you did before, and you can start like a new identity and a new reputation and get like a second chance without being as we have today. And that some people commit suicide because they get canceled online, right? And they cannot start over because their face is all around the internet with some mistake that they make. So the idea is try to have a future where we don't have that kind of things happening, and people can have a success in online communities, working, participating. And if they make a mistake, they are not completely canceled, but they can keep their dignity or minimum reputation that they can bootstrap again. Hi, this is Alejandro with Krebit. If my conversation with the GRTIQ podcast has been helpful to you, then please consider supporting future episodes by becoming a subscriber. Visit grtiq.com/podcast for more information. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
GRTIQ podcast.
Thank you for listening.
You mentioned Orbis. Baptiste is somebody I've had on the podcast before, the founder behind Orbis. Be curious for listeners that are already familiar with Orbis, what type of ways Krebit could be applied to what they're building.
Yeah, it's great that you have brought that up. So actually, Orbis is one of the first protocols that has integrated Krebit credentials. So they recently added to their social protocol. For the social profiles, you can see the credentials that they have for both Krebit and also Gitcoin passports. So they are already integrating credentials, and you can also use those credentials in Orbis for gating access to channels based on that. And, minimally to know that these persons have verified their Twitter, their Gitcoin, their social media, their Discord, like at least that they're a real profile. So that's the first way that we have been working together. And in the hackathon that we just had, there were some interesting projects like combining all these protocols together and coming up with new stuff. There were some projects that were actually combining the social features and posts and followers from Orbis with the credentials to create new, like a score for you, like how reputable you are, and give you a score and give you another credential from that score. There's a lot of combinations that can be built. So that's a start with a few weeks since this integration came up. And we are very excited to see what new builders are going to come up with combining both protocols.
For listeners that want to learn more about Krebit and some of the things you're building there, what's the best way for them to learn more?
So we recently launched a 101 class, 101.xyz. And I really like that format because it's so easy to consume. And a lot of people has already taken that, and you end up with this NFT that you completed the class. So that would be the first way. And the other way is just going to the app and start getting some credentials, for free, and going to Orbis and start, creating your own community there. You can start gating people, getting access to channels in your community based on those credentials. That could be a good way to start. And then if you're a builder and you're building for Web3 Social, then you can also go to the docs and see how you can integrate either the reviews widget that we have, or issuing credentials from your protocol directly, and take it from there.
Alejandro, as you know, a lot of my listeners are enthusiastic about the Graph protocol and the future of the Graph. I'd like to ask you a couple questions about the Graph. Do you recall when you first became aware of the Graph?
Yes, I think it was the first time I learned about the graph was when the gas prices started coming up for Ethereum. So there was like this, a lot of excitement for building things in smart contracts and Ethereum. And you wanted to do a lot of things on chain. For example, like the first version of Krebit was doing a lot of things on chain and storing things on chain and, doing heavily use of this huge smart contract. And then when, we realized that will be very costly in terms of gas, and the gas prices started skyrocketing. So then the graph was a great alternative because you didn't have to then store a lot of data in the smart contract. You will just use the smart contract to change the states of the thing that you're working on. And then you could use the graph to actually store like the history of all those transactions and much more data and do much better queries. And it was just the perfect solution for that scenario. So after that, we scratched in the first version of our contracts. We decided to start over from a much more simpler contract and then create a subgraph. And that's the current version of our protocol is using the graph for all the reading of the passport and the passport state and the credential registry from our contract.
For listeners that aren't technical and have never built a project like you're building with Krebit, how would you describe how important a solution like the graph is for what you're doing?
So I would say the graph is a key part of what we are doing, because when you're talking about blockchain apps, you need the blockchain to actually write things that you want to write. But the graph is one of the best ways to read from the blockchain. So all the information that we want to access in a cost-efficient way, it's better to do it using the graph. And it's also much easier for other apps to tap into the data that is stored on-chain using the graph instead of going directly to the on-chain, which is much more hard to do. So it really simplifies the stack for Web3, and it also kind of reduces the costs. So it's very important.
Alejandro, I only have one more question for you before I ask you the GRT IQ 10. The last question I want to ask is advice for any listener that is like you before you started and launched Krebit. What's your advice to listeners that want to start building in Web3, but they don't know how to get started? They have an idea, they're nervous, they're trepidatious, whatever the reasons might be. What's your advice to them?
Well, the one thing you need as motivation to learn about building Web3 and working in Web3 is to understand that this is really a new cycle of technology. And if you want to be a part of it, you need to get your hands dirty. And at the moment that we are living now, it's going to be more easy than before, because a lot of huge challenges that were a couple of years back are much more easier right now. So this is a great time to join. Things are going to be easier. If you have good ideas, it's probably going to take you less time, less effort to build. So it's a great time to join and build and just go for it.
Alejandro, now I'm going to ask you the GRT IQ 10. These are 10 questions I ask each guest of the podcast every week. And I do it so that listeners can learn something new, try something different, or achieve more in their life. So are you ready for the GRT IQ 10?
Yeah.
The GRT IQ 10.
This is the way.
10 questions for astronauts floating in space.
What book or article has had the most impact on your life?
The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
Is there a movie or a TV show that you think everybody should watch?
Fight Club, but we cannot talk about that.
If you could only listen to one music album for the rest of your life, which one would you choose?
I think from Daft Punk, Random Access Memories. I think that was really, really what made it.
What's the best advice someone's ever given to you?
I think it was my aunt. Since I was a very little, she pushed me really hard to learn English as a second language. And that has really paid off. So thanks for that.
What's one thing you've learned in your life that you don't think most other people have learned or know yet?
So I find that a lot of people are afraid of death and they don't want to speak about death. But I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is, being conscious of death. And there's this Latin phrase called memento mori, which is be conscious of death. I think that's it.
What's the best life hack you've discovered for yourself?
I think I'm very visual. I like to draw, so I use that a lot, and even in the shower. I started having this magnetic board in the shower, so I can write down or draw whatever ideas come to me in the shower. That's the best thing I've done recently.
Based on your own experiences in life, what do you think is the characteristic or habits that best explain why people find success in life?
So I like this author called Steven Johnson, and he talks about the number of connections in your brain. He defines success, like the amount of connections that you form in your brain is the amount of your success. So I really relate to that.
And then the final 3 questions are complete the sentence type questions. The first one is, the thing that most excites me about Web3 is?
Decentralization of everything.
If you're on Twitter, then you should be following
Krebit Twitter lists.
And lastly, I'm happiest when?
I'm building. I love building stuff.
The GRT IQ 10.
After this, I show you how.
Alejandro Rios, thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous, and I was really anxious to speak with you to learn more about how you and the team at Krebit are addressing the challenges with identity and reputation in Web3. If listeners want to learn more about you and follow the things you're working on, what's the best way to stay in touch?
Thanks, Nick, for having me. The best way is on our Discord and our Twitter. So in Twitter, we are Krebit ID, and also our website is krebit.id. So you are welcome to find us there. And we are always open to collaborations and partnerships. So hope to see you there.
This has been a production of the GRT IQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review. GRT IQ Podcast.